Welcome, good afternoon. My name is Russell Todd. I'm just waiting for a few others to come through. Please note we are recording, so feel free to keep your cameras off if you would prefer. So croeso i'n cyfwelbyw a Dr Penny Miles o Prifysgol Caerfaddon am ymchwil ar brofiadau cefnogwyr Menywod yn Ffrainc yn ystod Ewro 2015. Russell Todd ydy fi fel wedi dweud, cyd-sylfaenydd Expo'r Wal Goch gyda Tim Hartley, sy'n gobeithio ar ei ffordd mewn hefyd, ac fi'n hostio'r session. So welcome to our live interview with Dr Penny Miles from Bath University about her research on the experiences of female fans in France at Euro 2016. I'm a co-founder of Expo'r Wal Goch, translated Expo of the Red Wall, along with Tim Hartley, who I'm hoping will be with us in a moment. He's been in a meeting this morning. Rhan o'r dathliadau ledled Prydain yw'r sesiwn hon ar gyfer Diwrnod Treftadaeth Chwaraeon Cenedlaethol 2021, ac rydyn ni'n ddiolchgar iawn i Sporting Heritage, y mudiad o'r enw Sporting Heritage am ei cefnogaeth gyda project hon trwy grant cymunedol. This session is part of the UK-wide celebrations for National Sport and Heritage Day today, 2021. And we're extremely grateful to Sporting Heritage for their support with this project via a community grant. Diolch fawr iawn hefyd i Nick Jones o Amgueddfa Bêl-droed Cymru in Wrexham am y gefnogaeth a chyngor. Big thanks to Nick Jones from Football Museum Wales in Wrexham for his support and guidance ongoing on the project. Bydd cyfle i chi ofyn cwestiynau i Penny tuag at ddiwedd y sesiwn, felly mae croeso chi ollwng nhw yn y panel clonc cyn hynny. There's an opportunity for you to ask some questions of Penny towards the end of the session, so please feel free to drop them into the chat before then. Mae croeso chi hefyd i drydaru yn ystod y cyfweld, ond byddwch yn siŵr i ddefnyddio'r hashnod NSHD 2021 a tagio at Sporting History, sef cyfrif Sporting Heritage ar Twitter, neu Sporting Heritage CIC ar Facebook a Insta. Please tweet, use social media during the interview. Be sure to use the hashtag NSHD 2021 and tag Sporting History on Twitter, but it's Sporting Heritage CIC on Facebook and Insta, and I'll drop those in the chat in a moment. Ac yn ola, nodwch am bod ni'n recordio'r cyfweld a bydd yn mynd ar ein channel YouTube cyn bod hir. Please, last of all, note that we're recording the interview, which will go up on our YouTube channel as well. So felly, croeso cynnes, warm welcome to Dr Penny Miles. Hi Penny, okay?
Yes, thank you very much, Russell.
Really grateful for you fitting us in your busy sort of teaching schedule. I know September's a bit of a mental time, I guess, for academics and people at universities. Do you want to say a little bit about yourself, maybe a bit of background into the work before we get into the interview more formally?
Yeah, so, well, first and foremost, big thanks to Expo'r Wal Goch for supporting me in applying, well, coming together, bringing us together with Nick Jones from the Football Museum for Wales to apply for this funding. And I'm very grateful to Sporting Heritage for this funding, because as a self-funded project, which always had impact inbuilt into it, I did all sort of need a means to get that work out. So I'm really grateful for the support from these guys in helping with that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the project. So I started looking, I wanted to centre the experiences of female fans at Euro 2016. So I travelled as myself as a female fan. I had a wonderful time, best time of my life. I've been waiting for this since the 1990s. But there was a slight sort of downturn in terms of the questioning of my presence there, questioning of my knowledge around football and things like that, which I wasn't really expecting in 2016. So I started this project to look at the experiences of female fans, especially in the away context. And whilst I was doing that, I also wanted to foreground and collect these really important oral histories that celebrated the Euros, but through a female lens. So these hidden histories, you know, if you look at the imagery around promoting the Wal Goch, if you look at most of the imagery from the Euros, it's still very white male dominant. Okay, so where are the women? What were the women's experiences within that? Were they positive? Were they negative, etc.? So as well as looking at these stories, I'm also looking at processes of inclusion and exclusion. But specifically with this project that we're moving forward, the idea is to celebrate women's experiences, to highlight the similarities between the longevity of some of our female fans that mirror those of the male fans. Okay, so there's less space to perhaps question that expertise that has been questioned historically. Also, you know, when you think of the pain of, you know, the Romania match, you know, some of my participants, myself included, remember that pain as well. So it's celebrating those similarities, but then also bringing in these new stories. What's it like to be a mother going to the Euros? What's it like to be pregnant at the Euros? Okay, do you go for less time, etc.? So some of these sort of underlying issues that perhaps might not be thought about, perhaps from a male's perspective, I'm also trying to bring in as well, really.
And that word celebration, I think, is, you know, is key to this. The theme for National Sporting Heritage Day this year is inspire, share, and celebrate. And you know, to what extent are you hoping that, you know, some of the other content that will be going up on the YouTube channel serves as a way of bringing more women into the spaces? Because you referred to a lens. To what extent do we need to have more spaces that, let's be honest, you said it yourself there, tend to be male-led, male-centered, certainly, in terms of debates and discussions and other forms of fan expression then for women and girls?
Well, I think it's starting the conversation that hasn't perhaps been had yet. So it's about creating a space for visibility, whether that's visual visibility, which I've tried to do on a Twitter feed, for example, and invite female fans who went to give me their visuals, though we can use that in the video as well, so that there's that visual representation. But it's also about creating a space for voice as well. And I think when I put out the call to other female fans for them to send me their visuals, there was very much a sense of appreciation that they were feeling represented through this work, whereas perhaps they hadn't done so before. So you then start to move towards something that becomes more collective as well. So I think through these processes that in a certain manner sort of starts to give other women confidence. Okay, there are other people like me, my experiences are reflected. And so that gives some strengthening there. But at the same time, it's also about raising awareness within those male-dominated spaces about these experiences that aren't perhaps the same. And so it's a sort of questioning of an opening, a questioning of those male spaces to start to open towards these sort of female experiences, as it were. And one thing that came out in the interviews, I think, is the confidence built over time of female fans. So the longer you're within this context, the more confident you become. Okay, if we have a greater mass of sort of visibility around this, is there a sort of growing confidence from an earlier stage, for example? But one thing I would say, it's very much still a white female perspective at the moment. So what about other female fans? You know, to what extent would a Welsh Muslim fan feel comfortable going into these spaces? To what extent? I haven't spoken to any lesbian fans. Okay, so how comfortable are they in these spaces? So I think this is the starting point. Where do we need to go from there, really?
And again, just to sort of reiterate, I suppose this is around women's experiences of following the men's team, is about being about the men's red wall, as it were, rather than following the women's team. And you know, I was in Cenedlaethol the other week watching Wales give Kazakhstan a good tonkin. You know, went with my daughter, and you know, she was quite consciously aware of how many other women and girls there were in the stands, because that wouldn't be the case if we'd been if she'd come to the Estonian game with me, for example. Because I know you're doing some other work around the fan culture as well, and I'm sure there's a sort of a crossover. Nick, bring you in there. You had a question for Penny around you know, that positive experience for female fans.
Yeah, thanks, Russell. Yeah, Penny, you mentioned obviously the Wales fans in 2016 got a lot of praise for sort of the way they were in France and the sort of celebrations and behaviour. You sort of touched on before, maybe one or two experiences you were not expecting in 2016. So I just wondered, from your experience and the interviews you conducted, what can other fans do or not do, perhaps, to make it a more positive one for female supporters watching the men's matches in particular?
Well, I was quite surprised in the data that physical harassment was quite so prevalent within the experiences of female fans. So I think male fans being aware that verbal and physical sexual harassment occurs on our terraces, to be looking out for it, to start to call this kind of behaviour out. Okay, we can't do it on our own. If there was one instance of a female fan, she was on her own in the Canton stand, okay, at a home match, and something happened and she just moved out the way. She didn't feel as though she wanted to sort of challenge it in that moment, so she removed herself from the scenario. But should she have to do that? She felt that she'd have had the support had she done it, but it's just sort of essentially ruining her experience. So can we have sort of more allyship, I suppose, from the male presence within that physical space? But there's also a relationship between this online and offline space as well. So I think, you know, those people who are online experience a lot of sexism at, you know, participating on Twitter, for example. Okay, can we ask men to start calling that out? I have seen examples of this being called out in recent days. But that needs to happen more frequently, and not just the women calling it out, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there was a recent, just on that last point, there was a recent example, I think, on Twitter with a questioning of a female official at a Welsh game, which you know, got quite a strong reaction, and a lot of people were calling that out, which was good to see, as you say. But we need to see more of that, really, don't we? I think.
Yeah, so I was once calling out something, or wanted to call something out around sexual violence, but I question whether I want to do that, because do I want the pile-on that will ensue? Or does, you know, when men got involved in this recent incident that you're talking about, and I think that helped to tip the balance, as it were, rather than just carrying on with the sort of sexism within the timeline around a woman calling out sexism. When men start to do it, it changes the discourse, and then you can bring, you know, if they're sort of quite weighty accounts, for example, then, you know, they can bring all their followers along, some of their followers along. You know, there is quite a lot of solidarity within the Welsh fan base, and those, for example, that followed club and country felt more included within the country space versus their club. So that there are lots of positives, but we have still got quite a way to go. Yeah.
And just one more sort of extension to that, I guess. What did you find, or would it be your experience that it tends to be a pack mentality with this kind of thing, and actions that perhaps individuals wouldn't dream of doing, it can happen when you're in a group and you have that sort of protection of the group to some extent?
Yeah, so when I originally set out to do this, I wanted to do interviews with female fans, and I also wanted to do focus groups with male fans, led by a male researcher, to try and understand that group mentality a little bit more. The research went off in a different direction, and maybe that's something to do for future reference. I also think in the away context, there's a drinking element that is also related to this group culture. You know, Mark Hughes referred to the Euro 2016 as a big stag do. Okay, so women generally aren't included within these stag do spaces. So again, a few different elements combine there to perhaps fuel it even more.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
It's okay.
And the lack of inhibitions that tend to come with those sorts of environments and languages and the rest of it. Slightly, perhaps, possibly controversial question, in the sense that, you know, to what extent should Wal Goch, the Red Wall, start creating or should women in the Wal Goch be creating more of their own specific networks, fan groupings, or should there be a question of being more vocal and visible within the current ones, given, again, what we've alluded to, that they tend to be male-led, male-centred?
And this is something that has come up in the interviews, that creating sort of a women's group. So the FAW have been involved in creating the Rainbow Wall and Amgueddfa recently. So I have also put it to them that they help to also create a fan group for women following the men's team. So for example, in the away context, there are some women who are quite happy to travel alone, some who normally travel with a partner or group, but when that partner or group can't go, they then don't feel safe enough or confident enough to go, perhaps knowing that there was a sort of group of other women going who they could contact if they needed to, or someone to meet up for a drink beforehand, then that possibility existed. Within the home context, I think very much we need to be able to advocate from a female perspective, and moving forward, multiple female perspectives. So when an incident occurred in the Canton stand, the response from the police was extremely insufficient in responding to quite a serious case. So I'm not sure, whilst we need male allies to advocate with us, I'm not sure that they understand the scenario enough to be able to perhaps explain on our behalf what's needed, why it's important that that's needed. So perhaps a more joint up approach, but I think there needs to be space for female voices, because what I found within other parts of the research, so looking at women in football within the media, within football, Welsh footballing organisations, women's voices are too easily shut down. So I think by just including one woman within the FSA, for example, isn't perhaps weighty enough. You include a collective, you're able to build up, for example, you're able to perhaps send out some surveys, find out a bit more about experiences to bring that to the table. I'm not sure the structures there presently can do that. And I think it needs expanding out even further, including Amgueddfa, including the Rainbow Wall, including, as I mentioned before, the intersections among these. When I look even at participation within CCS, it's much more diverse in the home context than the away context. I still see very few women of colour within that home context. Okay, why is that? Why are they not coming to the stadium? Okay, and in the away context, very, very few people of colour, men or women at all. Again, why is that? Okay, it's not the subject of the study, but it's an indication of where we still have to go as a fan base.
Jason Webber at the FAW, I know he's already, getting sort of stuck into some of those issues, but it's a big job. It's a big job. I'll invite Tim in a moment to ask the question. Just to take a look at the chat. Really important comment from Laura McAllister. Thanks for dropping by, Laura. Around why the research is important, and the sort of weird male exceptionalism, or the exceptionalism towards male dominance and domination of these spaces. Wouldn't tolerate it in any other sector, and you're no doubt right. Also, there's going to be more content on the YouTube channel. There's a really fascinating one. Maybe bring a little bit of levity back into the conversation, interview with SFCers who travelled to France with a little one, as well as being 5 months pregnant. And we were joking just before we started how the little one sort of wakes up. I won't give any spoilers about the interview. It's funny, but it's really interesting. It's very touching in places. How sort of woke up just as Bêl scores against Slovakia in the opening, but then drops off again. And I'm amazed because it was pandemonium where I was in the stadium. I wish my children slept like that well. But that's on the YouTube channel. There's going to be some more there as well. Siona David is on there, but also putting some of the oral histories to images as well. Tim, question for Penny?
Yeah, just a couple of points. Thanks, Penny. Far be it for me to say let's not have women only or LGBT only groups. However, I think if we shy away from saying this is a problem for all of us, we're missing a trick here. And I'm just thinking of the stag do mentality. And it's also to do with antisocial behaviour across the whole piece. And we should be involving, and I put it in the chat there, we should be involving players, ex-players, commentators, the associations themselves, as they have done on races, and come up very strongly. And to normalise calling out sexism as we do homophobia and racism on the terraces. And I just fear that if we say we're doing Wal Goch and Menywod, then the vast majority of people in the stadium are not going to get it at all. And that is a big issue for me. And, you know, is the FAW calling this out? Have we got links with the fan embassies and people who are wearing the tabards calling it out as well? And these are just questions, as I say, I haven't got the answers, but I think this is something for all of us to take on. And I think the recent racism issues have actually managed to bring the football family together and say, we're not having it. You know, you've got the individuals, but, you know, everybody is saying we're not having it. It's as if sexism has just been parked and left, if you like, to people like yourself and groupings to deal with.
I think that's part of the reason why I started it, really, because when I used to go to football, you'd hear, okay, tokenistically and no place for racism, but at least you'd hear it over the tannoy, and then no place for homophobia and sexism. It was like, okay, silence. And I think it was only after the 2018 World Cup that there started to be a greater response to, we don't want honey shots anymore. There were a few incidents where female reporters were physically assaulted on camera by male fans, and also sort of Me Too happening to question institutional sexism. So these sort of factors came together to start to question it. One of the things that I want to do coming out of this is to try and work with the FAW to have a campaign for our fans around calling out sexism. You know, I don't think creating, a women's group is enough. I think it's a start, but I think there needs to be an active campaign to start calling this behaviour out. Sexism is internalised. When you listen to some of the interviews, the way that it's brushed off by some of our participants, it's so normalised as part of the behaviour, it's sort of almost expected, that really does need to be challenged quite significantly. And it's about education. No, you heard about the other day about the amount of sexual assault in schools. So if the sex education in schools or relationship education in schools isn't doing it, can we use football as a means to start, football with such a broad reach, to start to challenge these behavioural practices that are already quite embedded from teen years, it seems.
And that was one of the founding sort of premises, if you like, for Tim and I behind Expo'r Wal Goch, was the extent to which you can use football as a medium to address issues, whatever they might be. And we talked about, the heritage. This is part of today, but volunteering, cultures of volunteering and giving, and building sort of civil society and solidarities, etc., etc. Laura, question or a point for Penny?
Yeah, thanks, Russell. Yeah, really, I value Penny's research immensely. I think it underlines how little research we have on all aspects of women's football. And that was my point, really. Football has this incredible exceptionalism where we accept that men run it, they govern it, they do it, they watch it, and we fit in with the culture of them so doing. And most of us, including men here, are feminists and wouldn't accept that in any other sphere. And yet we still seem to almost accommodate it in football. And of course, there are long-standing historical, cultural reasons for that. But I think Penny's making a really valid contribution by looking at a fan's perspective. And I was just going to bring in a point, because I was in some of my work with UEFA at the moment on the Future of Football convention. We very deliberately, and I had no input into this, by the way, but we very deliberately brought in fans groups to some of the conversations around governance and the women's game. Tim knew some of the individuals involved, I'm sure. And I was really impressed with the way they talked about research they were doing around events like the 2018 World Cup, because at one level, the 2018 World Cup in France was tremendously successful, brilliant profile, great fan engagement. But if you dig below the surface of that a little bit, there were really significant issues with security on entrance, because there weren't enough female stewards to search female fans. And of course, you know, that it's counterintuitive, isn't it? Because so many more female fans would go in, yet they queued for half an hour and men sailed through the gates. And that exemplifies for me the really fundamental issue that we have to keep coming back to, which is the governance of our sport. Because until we really address the complete lack of diversity in the governance of the game, from, you know, I've stood in an election this year, so I know how bad it is, from FIFA to UEFA to the national associations to the area associations to the clubs. You know, as long as we tolerate this most anachronistic, anomalous model of governance, none of these issues will ever really be resolved. We'll have great research like we have now on the physiology of women players. You know, it's taken us nearly 100 years to actually do research on menstruation and performance, for God's sake. You know, it's ludicrous. Why do women get more ACL injuries than men? The reason is because there were no women researching it and no men were interested in researching it. So it all connects, doesn't it? The research connects to the governance connects to the research. But I think we have to be more strident on these issues. You know, we particularly men, but all of us women as well, we can't tolerate things that, quite frankly, we wouldn't tolerate in any other sector.
Yeah, I quite agree. You know, I've studied political institutions, judicial institutions, and in Latin America, which is historically a sort of more male-dominated sphere anyway, and footballing institutions surpass those significantly in terms of the lack of opening towards women within those spaces. And it's why I'm looking at the interplay between FAW, media, fans, etc., just to sort of build up a more comprehensive picture of how these interlock. So if you look at the invisibility of players, for example, that is both a media issue, but also footballing in institutional issue in terms of how they've worked in conjunction to basically render these female players historically invisible, as you will know all too well, I would imagine. But
quite interesting, Laura, as you're posing that question, I can see over your shoulder Tash Harding. I remember at the match worn shirt exhibition at St Fagans the end of 2019, and she spoke at one of the evenings. It was Joe Ledley, I think Rob Earnshaw and Tash Harding. And Tash was talking about how when she made her debut, maybe 16, 17, 18, quite young, and a bit of time ago, how basically she was wearing, maybe you remember this, Laura, was wearing basically the cast-off shirts from the men that had, you know, they were far too big and just things like that. And I'm standing there thinking, I had no idea that had just completely bypassed me. And when it's that level, you begin to realise why the rest of it perhaps is as it is. Really want to stay on time, on track for time, because I know Penny's got teaching responsibilities. I'll bring Nick in a moment to just make a couple of sort of small asks of people, and hope that people can cascade those out with respect to, you know, what the Welsh Football Museum can do with respect to women's game and women's participation in the heritage, etc. But Penny, you know, if someone wants to get in touch and share their story, or know someone who's got a burning issue to share with you, what's the best way of doing it?
Either via Twitter or email, so p.l.miles@bath.ac.uk, and I think it's at pennymiles31, not too sure.
You're findable. Or W Menywod, isn't it? Well, the Wal Goch Menywod Twitter account as well. Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Russell. Yeah, just quickly from me, really, just on the Football Museum for Wales project, we're at the sort of fairly early stages of design and content, but we're starting to flesh that out. And really, I mean, what we've touched on in this session, and Laura's mentioned as well, I'm very conscious of the kind of hidden history of women's football, I mean, across the UK, but in Wales, obviously, in this case, that we need to tell that story. And it's to really sort of hope that a project like this will help to kind of put the word out and encourage people that were involved to come forward. Because I really want to kind of hear those stories and want to tell those stories in the museum. We also want to build the women's collection, which is seriously lacking at the moment. So that was you know, why we want to kind of support projects like this. And then also just an extension of that was to say that we're going to very soon start some engagement activities. So there'll be a sort of Wales-wide survey going out talking about the museum and what people might expect to see in it. and then also some later down the line, some engagement panels as well. Some will be particularly sort of football oriented, heritage of football oriented, and again, to appeal, it would be great to sort of see and have as much female involvement in those panels and with those surveys that we possibly can, really. So yeah, it's to kind of put the word out with people on this call, and again, you know, thanks to Penny and the project for kind of helping with that, I think.
Thanks, Nick. Absolutely no need to apologise, Laura, for dropping some links and references. Wasn't aware of the heritage dimension to the next Welsh women's game against Estonia. Oh, them again. At Cardiff City Stadium next month, 200th game. And I think I saw someone put on Twitter that Jess Fishlock has played in something like 125 of those games. And I was just like, that just blew me away. That should be known. It should be celebrated already. But anyway. Could we have Tim, do you want to ask that question? What are we getting at?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I wasn't aware of this documentary that Laura's mentioned here about the women's game. It's the kind of thing where we should really push it. Can we have a pre-screening screening? I would say in Chapter, because it's down the road from, across the road from you, Laura. And we have a 1+3 afterwards, and we invite people there. And these things we're saying amongst ourselves, I do feel with the Wal Goch sometimes we're preaching to the converted. But if we put Noel Mooney on the spot and say, where is it in the programme? Where's it in the announcement? What are you actually going to do about it? And you've got that programme to say, we've got this heritage. Of course we want to celebrate it, but it's not all rosy in the garden there. So that was just a suggestion that, Laura, I mean, I don't know if you're part of the programme, maybe we could speak to S4C, who might give us that night or the night before or an afternoon or a virtual malarkey.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time, but just to fill you in, I'm actually presenting the programme. It's seen through my eyes of the time from when I was playing to like my daughter's experiences now, and it's an hour-long documentary. We're talking about the commission, the screening date at the moment, but it might be that we tie it in with the Wales-Estonia game, because that's part of the heritage event linking the 200th game for the women. But in any case, we're hoping that there'll be a launch event around, around the documentary. So it would be good if we could get you guys involved in that as well, so that it isn't just, talking to the same old faces, really.
I'll leave Penny with the final word before she gets off, but quick thank you for Belinda as well, Belinda Scarlett for Sporting Heritage for dropping by as well. Big thanks once again to them for the grant that's supporting not just this, but the project. Best luck, Belinda, for the rest of today that's going on. It's been absolutely crazy on Twitter. But Penny, and then we will close. But diolch yn fawr am ddod. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, a huge thanks to Belinda as well for supporting. Just in response, Tim, to Noel Mooney, I did present my work to him at the last equality meeting, and he was very responsive and said, basically, you should present that to the whole of the FAW staff. And I also made him question his own perceptions, for example, around the red wall. So he was pleasantly receptive. So I was quite pleased about that.
Diolch yn fawr, Penny. Pob lwc gyda fe. Well done. Good luck with it. And we'll be in touch. And this will be up on the YouTube channel very, very soon. I'll let you carry on.